Marama Davidson.
Tēnā koutou, huri noi te whare. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ka tū au ki te tautoko I tēnei pire, he pire mā te iwi Ngatikahu ki Whangaroa me tōna whakatau tiriti. Nō reira, mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Mr. Chair, it is right that we acknowledge this iwi and particularly all of the people who have struggled and negotiated their way through this settlement. And it is right that I again acknowledge Dr. Ala Henry, Pita Pangari and Dave Henare as some of the lead negotiators for this settlement. Ngatikahu ki Whangaroa settlement has also given me the opportunity. I wanted to look back at some of the other beginnings of where the settlement came from. And I stand here as a neighbour, Ngāpuhi Mokopuna, to Ngatikahu. And so it was interesting for me to learn about, in the 1980s, how Pita learned from his kaumātua and kuia about the specific grievances, about the specific land confiscations by the Crown, and that these were long-standing. And in those 1980s, learning from his kaumātua and kuia exactly how that had impacted on their iwi, on their people. And so that in 1983, the kaumātua and kuia came from the far north and actually held a hui in Auckland at Tūtahi Tonu, the marae at Epsom Teachers College. And they were the first group, Ngatikahu ki Whangaroa were the first group to have a hui at this marae. It had only just been built. So our kuia from the far north came down to this hui, and some of them I found out included Tom Thomas, Haki Tātai, Auntie Mata, Wiroa Hinari, Tūroa Te Pānia, Heta Te Pānia, Kātera Manuel and Sid Hawkeye. And I thought about our far north kuia and kaumātua coming down to have this hui in Tāmaki Makaurau and talking with the younger generations and talking about the history and the absolute impact of whenua being confiscated and what that meant. And that it went right back, actually, to Pita's great-great-uncle, Hemirua Paiara, who had consistently been taking grievances and drafting petitions to the Crown for redress. This is when I think about the beauty of the process. And that's not something I often say about the process, because the process was brought about by grievance, and that is not beautiful at all. But as an adult, and as a mokopuna raised in Hokianga and learning about my own treaty grievances for my own people, I'm also starting to understand that it is our people who have instilled the beauty of our history in these claims. And that the kōrero, to talk about Pita's great-great-uncle Hemirua Paiara, who embellished the fighting spirit of Māori by continually drafting and seeking redress, and how it then, after his death, was taken up by Pita's grandfather, Hemiroha Paiara. And that the beauty of the strength that we can see always in these stories that come up through these processes. And so being proud to stand for the Green Party in support of this bill, in support of the hard work of those still here and those gone, is an honour, and also because I have one thing that I have loved about my job as a Member of Parliament, as a spokesperson for Māori Development and our representative on the Māori Affairs Select Committee, is the privilege of the depth and richness of what has actually happened in these negotiations the rich history and the stories that have come out, the names that we honour here in this house today, including the many names who we may not honour specifically, but the many people who have been involved in this negotiation. And it has been fraught. They are all fraught. By their very nature, treaty negotiation between iwi and the Crown, due to the grievances and the generational impact that has had, is always going to be fraught. But I wanted to acknowledge some of the specific fraught nature. And so everybody recalls, particularly Ngatikahu will recall, the protests that also happened around particular pieces of land. And I think back in December 2004, for example, the occupations that happen over particular pieces of land that are up for negotiation. And these create uncomfortable times during all of our iwi negotiation processes. We never fully agree on a nice, soft, simple process along the way. That is not how any of these negotiations happen. And I wanted to acknowledge those difficulties. I wanted to acknowledge the hard raru that each iwi and hapu have to balance and contend with. I wanted to acknowledge that the Crown breaching of the Te Tiriti partnership creates this factions, creates the hardships and the raru that set hapu and iwi against each other in these very processes. I want to acknowledge the protesters, but I also want to acknowledge how difficult then that made the negotiators' jobs as well. I acknowledge all of that, all of it. We are dealing with the hardships of these negotiations as Māori, not because of something that was in our control. And that is the main thing that I wanted to acknowledge all of our iwi and whānau who have come here to this house today to be a part of witnessing the first reading of your treaty settlement bill. Because the Greens have always understood that this is a deal. And as my colleague Catherine Delahunty will have laid out for the previous treaty bills on this occasions, we are very clear about what this has done to Māori and about what it continues to do. We are very clear that those breaches continue. We are very clear that these are deals and not settlements. However, so we're, like all of our Māori MPs of this honourable House, we are in this predicament where, while we acknowledge the incredibly hard and heartbreaking work that has gone into these negotiation journeys, we also understand it's never ever going to be what is rightful redress. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so it is my honour, I've just been told that I've got 2 more minutes, thank you. It is my honour to stand here and be completely, feel really awkward about these treaty deals. And I will continue to. And some of my iwi in the north are coming up. And I want to acknowledge my connection to this northern iwi, to Te Taitokerau. I want to acknowledge all of the raru. We can't dress this process up, but that's what makes this process what it is. I want to acknowledge all of the raru beforehand. I want to acknowledge some particular Crown acknowledgements, like the 1863 Mangonui purchase, and exactly how, again, we see Crown awarding individual title broke down our collective kaitiaki responsibilities, set us up against each other as Māori and as kaitiaki of those lands. So I wanted to acknowledge the particular acknowledgements, and there are many, and as Calvin referred to, including the apologies, there are apologies that aren't included that always should be, and Te Reo was another one that each of our iwi lost and underwent as well. But I want to acknowledge the apologies, and what the Crown does own up to in these settlements is still important. Is still the Crown being able to say, we did wrong, and that is important. But the real work, as we all know, is going to continue. And for that, I acknowledge our iwi who have come here to the House today. Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you.
Kia ora. Kia ora.